All right, everyone. So good evening. I'm so excited to see a full house, and I know that folks will continue to make their way in as they're traveling from work, and that we're also joined this evening by folks who are watching the live stream. So we'll wave hello. I'm Nicole Vlado-Torres. I'm a co-chair, one of the two co-chairs of the Housing Committee here at the AIA New York, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event, 9 Ways to Make Housing for People Designed as a Multiplier of Good. And I'd like us to take a moment to reflect on that final word, good. I don't know about you, but this word hits a little differently now than it did in August when we first started planning this event. And I imagine many of us here are thinking and feeling an urge to do good, be it in supporting our colleagues and neighbors, caring for our cities, our nation, and the earth. So tonight we have the opportunity to reflect on the ways that we can positively impact the built environment through our work as planners and designers, and in particular, designing with people in mind. So I look forward to this opportunity, and I'm thankful to everyone who's made this evening possible, and I'll just go through a few of those thanks. I'll start with our esteemed guests, David Baker and Amanda Loper from David Baker Architects, our moderator, Katie Swenson, and I'm gonna call him our East Coast, West Coast translator, and Housing Committee member, Brad Lieben. Thank you all for bringing your experience and your insights with you tonight. And I want to extend gratitude to our event sponsors, Boak Modern and Fireclay, for supporting this gathering. And you can learn more about them on their websites. I think we have some information on the registration page about them. Also, while you're here, you'll find books in the hall. This event was, of course, inspired by a book, the David Baker Architects' 9 Ways to Make Housing for People, which has been described as a modern-day manual for urban housing. And we're happy to have Head High here tonight to ensure that you have your very own copy of this gorgeous text. They also have copies of Katie's book, I believe Design with Love is here as well, another title that can inspire hope beyond tonight. And finally, thanks to our host, AIA New York, and their staff, Salmata in particular, and to my fellow Housing Committee member, again, Brad, and the multi-talented Dynamo writer, strategist, and convener, Kira Gould, for being such thoughtful, generous, and hardworking partners. Thank you. All right, so before we begin, I'd love to know who's with us in this space tonight. So by a show of hands, do we have students? If you're a student, can you raise your hand? Awesome, thank you. I know we're mid-semester and that's not an easy feat. How about educators? Who's teaching those students? All right, me too. And I imagine just a few, but practicing architects? All right, wonderful. And how about developers of affordable housing or housing in general, or working in the finance space? All right, awesome, great, great. Anyone else just working for the city more broadly? Awesome. All right, and lastly, just raise your hand if you consider yourself as someone who is committed to housing. All right, so anyway, we're glad that you're here. And now that we have a better sense of who you are, we can get started. We're joined tonight by our moderator, again, Katie Swenson. Katie is a nationally recognized design leader, researcher, writer, and educator. As principal at Mass Design Group, she focuses on how design promotes economic and social equity, environmental sustainability, and healthy communities. And some of you might recognize her from her time with Enterprise Community Partners, where she led design and sustainability initiatives, including the Rose Architectural Fellowship Program. She's the author of 2 books, again, ones that I mentioned earlier, Design with Love and also In Bohemia. She's an AIA Public Architecture Award recipient and serves on the board of the Van Allen Institute. She teaches at Columbia University and the Parsons School of Design. That's all. Okay, so without further ado, let's bring Katie up to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, Nicole, thank you. It's such a delight to be here. Let's see, what's on my screen is not what's on that screen. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Salmata, are you going to help me with this? Thank you so much. So it's great to be here, and I would say a special thanks to obviously the Housing Committee, but also Kira Gould aforementioned. I'm sure many of you know that she's just the person who brings ideas and people together. So we're just delighted to be here, and I couldn't be happier than to have been asked to moderate tonight. I'm going to just introduce myself briefly, but Mass stands for a model of architecture serving society. Our goal is to try to figure out how, as a design firm, we can take on some of the more challenging issues of our time. We are here in New York, so I have a couple colleagues here with me, many of whom are working on this stunning new project for the Brooklyn Public Library in New Lots. We're doing it in partnership with Marble Fairbanks Architects and just an incredible crew. So I want to just put out the word. We're here. We're absolutely so delighted. We're also doing a beautiful new housing development project, HBD NYCHA project with Canva out in Kingsborough in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. And we're partnering with Marvel Architects on this project as well. So housing is something that I am passionate about. I know you all are passionate about. And we're absolutely passionate about at Mass. We have about maybe a little over 1,000 units of housing right now in our own pipeline. And I would say we're trying to learn from the best. You know, this is our goal. We're all trying to be here learning from the best. So we have a number of projects, many in Boston, but not only, around the country. So tonight is really about this question around housing. And I did want to just start by setting this stage, though, a little bit. I think it took me a long time working in the industry. When you're a houser and you're in the housing industry, like when it looks like a nail, it must be a hammer. However you say that. And I was actually kind of chagrined to learn from Jim Stockard at the Graduate School of Design that if you take all the housing in the United States and you look at anything that is subsidized for low-income people at all, and that doesn't just mean LIHTC projects or housing credit projects, that means any type of housing, the number is under 5%. So we really have our work cut out for us. I think we all know that design quality is an essential part of solving some of these larger policy issues, but we have a lot of work to do. I looked at the stats from last year, and they're looking even worse. So unfortunately, we're not making gains, essentially, as a group. If all housing units, only 4.3% were built to be affordable for people with low incomes. I think the last slide mentioned about home ownership. We can talk all night about the subsidies for home ownership, but we won't. That's not what we're here for. And then, I also sort of had to ask the question, what would it be like to have enough? And so I think the answer is somewhere around maybe 30% of all housing should be subsidized for even the very lowest income people. Now, that's not talking about the missing middle and teachers and firemen and all this stuff. But I just want to start by raising our kind of larger aspirations just a bit. So when I got started in this field in around 2001, as a Rose Fellow with the Enterprise Rose Fellowship, I was looking around the country saying, well, how do I learn about design excellence in affordable housing? And I called David Baker. I went to San Francisco. I knocked on his door. He has an elegant townhouse on a kind of little side street in the Mission. He's got a nice steel banister that he knit a cozy around. I got to visit some David Baker Architects projects. And during my time as a Rose Fellow and my time at Enterprise, I've gotten to visit quite a lot of affordable housing developments. Well, guess what? They are not all created equally. And David's and his teams are really best in class. So in about 2010, with David, and you see Larry Scarpa up there, we said we need to create a kind of forum to have these national conversations about what is excellence in affordable housing, how do you do it, and work with developers and designers together. So over about 12 years, we did this project called the Affordable Housing Design Institute with these terrible acronym, AHDLI, no one ever liked that. Some of you might recognize a few folks. It was a star-studded cast year after year. All the great people, including Mark, came and gave their participated in this kind of design charrette with developers. And the DBA team became our kind of go-to. Like, we needed a DBA member at every institute, basically, because what would become their 9 ways was such an elegant way in. So I happen to put the group photo here that Amanda's in when she joined us in Seattle, I believe. I can't remember what year that was. 2018? No idea. Okay. At any rate, so this idea that we need to first learn from each other in different places. Listen, I've been in New York 4 years now. I've been here before at another phase of my life. I get it. We're the only place. Except for, actually, we do need to learn good lessons from each other. And DBA and their sort of curriculum kind of underpinned this program for a long time. So one of the things amongst that Nicole kindly mentioned is I do teach at Parsons, and I call my class homemaking. Not homemaking like the female who works at home, lowercase, one word, but capital H, capital M. And I argue that we as architects should call ourselves homemakers. Like, let's get up close and personal. Housing is where someone else lives. Home is where you live. So let's be homemakers together. I use 9 ways as part of my curriculum, but what I didn't fully understand was that I kind of cribbed my title from DBA's title, How to Make Housing for People, or How to Make Homes for People. And so this idea of bringing together this kind of both these best case practices, but also this kind of deep empathy and care. That's what defines a David Baker project. When I visited, you could feel it. And that's part of what we're here to talk about tonight. So I'm so delighted to welcome David and Amanda here in conversation, and also thrilled to have Brad Lieben, who also has been a veteran of the public interest design world. Brad and I met when he worked at Public Architecture, if you all remember, back in the aughts. And he was a member of the David Baker crew, and now we're lucky to have him as part of our housing community here in New York City. So come on up, and I think we'll get started.
All right, is the mic working?
It works.
Okay, great. All right, so as Katie was saying, I have, my career spans both California and San Francisco, where I lived for over a decade and worked for a long time at David Baker Architects, and then came to New York in 2020 and worked for Marvel for a number of years in the housing space, both affordable and market rate, and then I launched my own practice in 2024. So I'm hoping to kind of be able to connect some dots between East Coast and West Coast tonight, and also just bring some of the New York City housing context to the conversation that we're going to be having here. And so when I came to New York and started practicing here, one of the things that struck me as really different than California was just sort of the density here. And I would say that the number of units per development is a lot higher, and that the projects, at least that I was working on, tended to look more like the one on the right, these concrete high-rise buildings, whereas in California, most of the work that I was working on was stick-built, wood-framed over podium, concrete podium, the 5/1 mid-rise type multifamily housing development that actually is much more common in the rest of the country. And so the image on the left is a great DBA project, and I would say probably around the same number of units maybe as the high-rise on the right, but it tends to be this lower, more horizontal kind of development that we call, that's referred to sometimes as landscrapers in California, these wood-framed over podium buildings. But I think that this could actually be flipping in some ways. So in a lot of places, including San Francisco, there's a lot of upzoning going on, and there's more and more high-rise development happening. And then meanwhile, in New York, with 45X, which is a tax incentive that market rate developers get if they put affordable housing in their buildings, there's now a prevailing wage requirement for buildings over 99 units. So there's a potential that we won't see as many of the bigger buildings over that size moving forward. And with City of Yes, there's a real focus on missing middle housing and sort of low and mid-rise mixed-use development in lower density parts of the city. So it could be that in the coming years we'll see more of the kind of mid-rise, slightly smaller scale development here in New York as well. Some other things that struck me as really different in New York coming from California, the biggest one was as of right zoning. The fact that almost all development here does not need to go through any sort of design review or community process. It was kind of the opposite, especially in San Francisco. So there was just a lot more community process on the projects that I worked on in California than here in New York, for better or worse. And whoops, I think I'm going the wrong way now. And so the timeline for getting a project entitled and permitted could take 3 years in California. I mean, that was not uncommon. So just, compared to New York, most projects don't have to go through the ULR process, and the permitting takes less than a year. So it's just a lot faster here. But this is changing. San Francisco now has project streamlining, and it's becoming more like what we're used to here in New York. And then the other striking thing for me was the high parking requirements here in New York. With City of Yes, there's been some incremental change on that, but still most of the city has parking minimums. Meanwhile, we're the most transit-rich city in the country. Less stringent building code, this is sort of anecdotal. I think that's right. Things like the scissor stair that only exist in New York, you can't do in other places. Also, just the level of oversight with regards to accessibility when you're doing a publicly subsidized affordable housing project. In San Francisco in particular, you have to go through a whole additional review process, and the interpretation of the ADA is much more strict there. And then the 485X tax incentive that I mentioned earlier previously was 421A. I was struck by what a big impact that has on the amount of development that happens here. Like when 421A expired and there was no longer this tax incentive for market rate developers who included a percentage of affordable housing, there was a huge drop off in permit applications. And now with 485X, maybe things are coming back online, but still it really has an impact on the type of development that happens as well. And then another unique thing is the right to shelter law here, which New York was the first place to have a right to shelter law starting in the late 70s. And I think that as a result, California does not have one. And as a result of that, there's more housing options for homeless folks here. We have, Katie was talking about multiple perspectives from different places. And I think, we, not only at the institute that you mentioned, but here tonight, we have 3 different perspectives from 3 different parts of the country. And so we're hoping to have a robust conversation at the end of this with all of you. So David, who's been practicing in the Bay Area for a very long time, Amanda Loper with David Baker Architects, who started an office in Birmingham, Alabama, and has been working in the Southeast for a number of years, throughout the Southeast, has a perspective from that part of the country, and then all of you here in New York as well. We're hoping that you'll participate in the conversation too. And I thought it'd be interesting just to look at a snapshot of those 3 places. And rent burden is a common barometer of the housing crisis. A rent burden household is one that puts more than a third of its income towards its rent. And New York is the highest, but they're all kind of similar, and including Nashville. So, maybe 15 years ago, that would have been a different picture. Like San Francisco and New York and cities like it were the first to experience the housing crisis, but now it's actually a national crisis. And so we're seeing housing reform, zoning changes in cities all over the country. And so the ones that I'm going to show you are not just happening in New York and San Francisco, but also in Nashville and a lot of other cities. Streamline reviews, so what I was talking about before about not having to go through as much plan review process, speeding up the eliminating community process, in some cases speeding up the process of getting permits. Density bonus. So in a lot of cities, including now in New York with the city of Yes, that includes the universal affordability preference. If you put in a percentage of affordable housing, in the past you could build as of right within the zoning envelope, and now you can go 2 or 3 stories higher than that as of right with no additional review. So you're able to build more densely with no additional process or review. The elimination or reduction of parking minimums we're seeing in cities all over the country, including here in New York with the City of Yes. Incentivizing office to resi conversions. So this is one of the first ones in New York that Gensler did down in South Street Seaport, the Pearl House. And then housing on faith lands. There's a lot of underutilized space on church lands, for example, like this parking lot that are now being rezoned to allow for affordable housing. And lastly, transit-oriented upzoning, so allowing more density and proximity to transit lines. And the result of all this is that we're building more housing than ever in the US. 420,000 new rental units in 2022 was the highest number in half a century. But that's good, but we still have a big deficit, and there's a lot more work that needs to happen. And so the bottom line is that we're streamlining density, and that can be scary. It's not easy to get it right. This was a New York Times article recently that was talking about how we're building more housing than ever, but it kind of has this like bland generic quality that people don't like. But density is wonderful, and that's why so many of us live in places like New York, and it's also the answer to many of the social and environmental challenges that we're facing now. And so I'm really glad that to be here tonight and to have David Baker and Amanda here to talk about the 9 ways, which I think addresses this problem of how we do density well head on. Thank you.
All right, guys, you gonna kick us off?
Somebody's got to move the slides. I volunteer. Oh, we have a clicker.
Okay, so yeah, we decided we'd throw in some questions. So the purple are kind of my questions that we frame. So I think this first one is around this kind of balance of commodity and quality. Tricky question. Housing is our greatest asset too, right? As part of our wealth building strategies. How do we think about density and how much housing we're building versus the kind of intimacy and quality of that housing? How do you guys wrestle with those issues? So I'll turn it over to you, Amanda.
Yeah, so I mean, as the fellow housing nerds in the room know, there's a lot that you don't have to reinvent, right? There's an iterative, repetitive, there is commodity embedded in the typology. And I think for us, over the years and really per project, it's a question about, well, what are we going to reinvent here? We're finally standardizing our units after, I can't believe we haven't done that yet, but we finally are getting around to, creating a more robust library. We're trying. There have been deep, polarizing conversations in the office about who wants their dishwasher where. I mean, it's been tough to solve, but this idea about, well, what can we standardize so that we can save our effort to innovate and invent, and do something new. So it is a balance. You want to add anything?
Well, I think that I think people worry too much about the existing condition, and they forget that these cities they were sort of planned. I mean, there was that great show about New York City and how it was was laid out. It wasn't really zoned, right? And all these things happened organically, and then at some point we decided we had to plan things carefully, or everything was going to go left away. And I think people just, they don't like change. They don't like the change in themselves, and they tend to think their urban environment or their environment is perfect when they're 25, and then it's terrible as things become taller or different in some way. So I think that that letting go a little bit of over management of the new is a good idea, personally. It's really interesting. My daughter moved to Mumbai, and boy, they don't worry about that And they're quite happy. They're like, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, actually, the New York Times article that I put up, the argument that it was, I think that when I first saw that headline, I figured the argument it would be making is that because we're speeding things up and we're building, more faster, like and there's maybe less regulation. But actually, what the argument that it's making is that there's maybe too much regulation. That there's a lot of there's neighborhood associations now that are popping up that are creating design guidelines that have mandates around things like exterior cladding materials and colors and facade modulation, and that they're all kind of adopting variations on the same sort of guidelines, and actually that's what's driving the sort of ubiquitous blandness of new development in a lot of cities. It's not that there's like, the developers and designers are just kind of doing whatever they want, but it's kind of it's the fear of, the really bad maybe, and trying to kind of make sure that everything meets a kind of baseline standard of quality that maybe sometimes ties the hands of good designers in terms of being able to do what the right thing is for a particular site and have a really distinctive architecture. So, maybe you have less really bad architecture with that approach, but you maybe also don't get as much character overall.
We worked on with a planner, and they were doing a design for development for this large site. And so they wrote this thing up, and it was like a notch every 100 feet, and change the materials here and do all that stuff. They said, let's test it on Mission Bay. Mission Bay is this new neighborhood in San Francisco. And so they ranked all the buildings. And I'm like, do we really have to do this? Can't we sort of depend on people to do good buildings, without prescribing all this stuff, which if you've ever designed a building under those guidelines, it becomes really a exercise in rule solving and gaming the system. And then at the end, my favorite building scored the lowest. Now that just might mean that I had bad taste. It was an SOM building and it didn't have a notch every 200 feet, and it did all these things wrong under the planning guidelines. But it was a really nice building. And then some of the really bad buildings, it's possible with any sort of regulation to do a bad building.
Yeah.
The 9 ways are not guidelines, though, right? They're not standards.
Got it.
How do you-
It's a checklist, excuse me. It's a checklist.
Well, yeah, the idea is that, the way that we use these would be different from the kind of buildings that occur, like if you guys in the audience use them. They're not about style, they're not about form. Yeah, they're kind of a framework.
Yeah, and frameworks can be really
You should tell them about it.
dumb. Okay, but I'm just gonna say I had a great teacher named Dick Peters at UC Berkeley, and he became quite a well-known daylighting designer, like in terms of the quality of daylight. And at one point he said, David, here's the rule. If you get light into a room from 3 directions, it'll be wonderful. And I think architects know that. You get a skylight and a corner window, the room is great. So you don't have to be that afraid of a simple solution. Okay, so these are the 9 ways talking about cookbooks. But we started out with I think it was the 95 and a half ways. And it just didn't have the resonance. It got really...
The whiteboard was very full.
Yeah. And then there was actually an article we were looking back, and we talked about the 11 ways. Yeah.
Not as sexy as the 9.
Yeah,
and
also
doesn't make a square.
Make that nice graphic square. And then we thought, let's just keep working. We got asked to be at the Cooper Hewitt in a show about that was called the other 99%. Yeah. And they said, well, you could send a model, you can send a rendering. And I said, geez, what project do we do a model of? We don't do models anymore. Rendering.
So you sent those pins?
Well, we were having another heated debate. I don't feel like we have debates, but all of our formative moments I think happen around debates. But we were like, no, we've got to do that project because of like the green stair, the circulation. Right. You'd be like, no, we got to do this project because of the way we the urban kind of restitching we did. And then so we realized there was this like litmus kind of embedded just underneath the surface of the way we'd started to approach the projects. And so it was a eureka moment for us.
It's kind of like the light from 3. And we do this, and we'll kind of look at a project. You can't get everyone in, but if you the more you get in, the nicer it is,
Yeah.
I would say.
And so the Cooper Hewitt allowed us the space to articulate them. And Jeremy Mindy, really talented graphic designer based out of San Francisco, came up with the icons. And there are pins. We didn't bring any tonight, but they exist. And if you emailed us, we'll send you some. So there's the book we've talked about.
Yeah.
But I'm actually going to get away from this stool, I think, to tell you guys about this first idea. Yeah, I don't want to.
You can stand up.
Yeah, so I'm going to start and just talk a little bit about the first idea about reweaving the urban fabric. And I guess another thing just to say about these is we intentionally wanted to write them and articulate them in a way that's not just for architects. You know, we're kind of bad sometimes at talking only to each other. And we wanted to write them and articulate them in a way that, you know, non-architects, planners, city officials, you know, community activists, and students could understand them. Civilians. And I think similarly, the ideas themselves are not rocket science, but they ensure quality in a place. And so sometimes it's worth naming those things. And so, yeah, this first idea is about looking outside of the property line and asking, like, what is it in your scope and your purview that you can do to, you know, create, repair, enhance what's going on in this community. So this is a case study of, like Brad said, one of our landscapers. So jealous of you skyscraper people, but we're landscraper people. This is in the South of Market neighborhood in San Francisco. The blocks are, I think they're long, but then I realize you guys are even longer. This is an 800 by 225 block. And, you know, it's not super traversable, especially this neighborhood. You can see it's kind of cut off by some freeways where this site is, you know, especially when the wind's blowing. These are pretty tough blocks to walk. And so that is one of the things we always think about too, especially when we're at the acre and kind of large urban scales. We start to think about how does it feel when people walk? You know, how long would it take to get from this place to this place? You know, that old school idea about, you know, putting walking radiuses on a site. And when you do, you know, things like break your building up and provide pathways through, that it really adds a lot of quality and connectivity to your pedestrian experience. And so what we did with this block, so we kind of controlled the 3/4 of the building that you see here. Let's see if this works. This parcel was for future affordable housing that actually is built now. We also had a funny requirement here that we had to provide parking not only for the housing, but for the adjacent commercial space. So the parking requirement was higher than usual. So we wrapped that, you know, we lined that parking garage with an active use. And then so we kind of made this cut around 200 feet there. That's a pedestrian, kind of publicly accessible paseo. And then this is actually a publicly accessible open space during daylight, this kind of sheltered, really lush courtyard. And then there's a third kind of pedestrian cut through that really starts to break that mega block down into bite-sized chunks. And so that's that building, that's that first pedestrian passage, that's the entry into the courtyard, and that's the other kind of public paseo. And so it really helps to kind of break down that street wall. Another kind of hack is that, you know, when you break up your buildings, you could create redundancy in circulation. And so we really like to use these bridges so we don't have to do extra stairs, but you have your cake and eat it too, so that you can kind of have that mass break, but also leverage the circulation. And David will probably talk more about circulation too. But this is this public passageway that we put the infrastructure in with power and shade so that hopefully, you know, they can have markets and things like that. And then to the left and right are these commercial flex spaces. So they're not necessarily just for living, but you could also do commercial uses as well. And then we really saved our money, and I can't believe we got these redwood trees kind of day one for, it really made this courtyard a real escape from what is kind of the more grittier, larger scale South of Market neighborhood. Really quiet, you can hear the birds and the leaves rustling. And then this is the kind of residential, quiet pedestrian passage, and then that future affordable housing goes to the right, so it's a mirror between those things.
Okay. So the second thing we're talking about, and when you talk about spending money, one of the things that happens as an architect, you know that if you have something that's easily identifiable as expensive, that becomes a target for the so-called value engineering, like one of my favorite terms. But if you do something that's sort of embedded in the design, it's very hard to cut it out. This is make big moves, and it really just means that you do something other than a shoebox. And we found over the years that if you have a reason for it, that's even better. So here, this is a formerly homeless housing. And actually what happens, these windows all look to the view of San Francisco. And if we put a window on the other side of the bay, they would look at the jail. And we thought, this is probably not the view that a lot of these folks really want, because a lot of them have been in the jail. And it's just, not a feng shui wonderful view. So we said, do a sawtooth. And actually the planning requirement here was to have windows on both sides of bays. But we were able, through California has been busy sort of demolishing planning requirements so that you can just go, nice idea, but I don't think so. Which has its good side and its bad side, because then when the developers go, nonprofit developers go, well, we don't want to put any nice retail frontage, they can just tell the city, no, we're not going to do it. So it's interesting what's happening. We probably have less planning requirements now in San Francisco than a lot of places, just about anywhere. We have almost none when the building is affordable. So, yeah, I know, it's interesting. It's because it got so bad. We produced so little housing. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so this is another thing. We had done both buildings on here, and the one on the left is actually, they're both micro studios. The one on the left is formerly homeless housing, and the one on the right is formerly homeless housing, and on the left we built later, and that's quite expensive, market rate condos. But and this is one of the things I think is a mindset to have them. This goes beyond big moves, but if you have the mindset that you're gonna make the building a place that is marketable, that's good, that you'd want to live, that will go a long way. And it doesn't necessarily involve spending more money. There's a kind of a mean-spiritedness that I think gets into affordable housing world, where and there's almost a feeling, there has been in the past a fear of it looking too good, because then voters would get angry. So if it looked really bad, people assumed it didn't cost very much money. Then this is another idea here. This is an historic district, the Tenderloin of San Francisco, a very, very challenged area. And here, we were designing this building for many years. And actually, it started out with the planners, and I love planners, but they're wonderful, and the interaction between architects and planners is often really useful. But in this case, they decided that they wanted us to carve the building all over the place. So the building became a lot taller, and it had like pieces lopped off. Well, if you cut Hugh Ferris out of the situation, if you go back, to the 19th century, nobody ever carved a building because, it costs money to carve and you get less space. So why would you do that? So here, we had this great high-rise that was stepping down, and it had like a $30 million gap. And the city just went, we'll never get that much money to put in here. And over time, we just said, we're going to just do this L-shaped building that's the same height, really straightforward. What can we do to make it more interesting? So we did this little twist. And all I can say is it's a lot harder than it looks, and I wouldn't recommend it. But it worked really well. And then we got down, this is a historic district, and the planner goes, oh, wow, that's such a great move, because we have a requirement to line up with the cornice next door, and you've done that beautiful twist so it lines up right with the cornice. And we went, yeah, that was really a good idea, wasn't it? It was serendipity or luck. And then here again, I'll make big moves where actually this one, we had put so many units in here that we were really having a hard time meeting our minimum square footages. So we did this swell, and so instead of doing the standard San Francisco Bay, we sort of bowed it out, and it became a fun process. And in terms of actually doing interesting buildings that don't cost more, we found that if you get the contractor involved with a kind of an interesting idea and tell them they're really, like, how would they, we need your help figuring it out. And the masons are like, can this thin brick make a curve? They get really excited about it, and they don't charge you for it, essentially. They don't go, that's a stupid idea. I think that's $1 billion, which you can always tell a contractor doesn't like an idea because they want to cut it out because they think it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, and then the rest of that building is just hardy. It's just flat and it's hardy. So it's a good balance. And then often we pair what David just talked about with this idea that we only have a little money to work with. How are we going to use it? You know, it's like spice in a dish. We didn't need that whole building to kind of have that swill everywhere. It actually would have diluted the idea. And so how can, you make a little go a long way? And where can we put that where it makes the most impact and is the more strategic? So on this particular project, our whole scope was there in blue. And so most of this building is, either cement plaster or hardy. But this one moment, this is that Mission Bay neighborhood that David mentioned. This is now a built park. And we knew that this corner would be kind of this new gateway into Mission Bay and would also just have a lot of eyes on it with the park. And so this was our moment. We tried to behave ourselves and keep it simple everywhere else. But our moment was there on that corner. So we brought the parapet height up just a little bit. And then, of course, that's where we put our effort into kind of detailing and like the quote premium material. And you had to do a lot of convincing for that material, I remember. People don't love rusty things as much as us architects. Have y'all noticed?
And we did that with Boat Modern, one of our.
Oh, shout out.
It was a prototype event, which a wonderful
Yeah,
company.
architects turned fabricators.
So a sponsor.
And this one is
plug.
Fireclay, another sponsor.
Yeah, oh wow, we're really nailing it. But these are those two projects that David showed with the bay. So there's that massing move, but then again, it's where we also put our detailing effort and our material effort, like Brad is saying. These are 4 different black glazes that actually when you're there, they really change and reflect as you walk around the building. And then it's also where we got a little fancy with our sunshades, and we plugged it into Ecotect and kind of analyzed the heat gain versus material usage. And so that's what outputted this kind of funky geometry because the shades change, as they change orientation. So the corner really was where we spent a lot of the effort. And then, not only does it happen on the exterior like we've been talking about, but also just where people are, the front door, the main amenity spaces, the things people are going to touch. Because again, most of the project will be, less expensive materials, but where can we put those warm things?
All right, so we have a commercial break.
Yeah.
And Brad, I thought we would go to you a little bit. So, I guess I think historically in New York, I feel like so much of the housing felt like kind of a backdrop. Maybe you guys agree with me, maybe you don't. But that we saw housing as kind of doing the layman's work of housing the people and lining the streets. And then we put a little bit more design intention into, churches and museums and iconic institutions. So I'm curious about this idea of housing as a sense of like a very respectable backdrop, a good one and a beautiful one. Here you certainly see it, versus this kind of design delight that we're seeing in housing.
So that's for me?
Well,
okay. I think the ground floor is, the way that most people experience not just housing but most buildings, and that there's a real opportunity there, and a lot of, I think, it's everything from ceiling heights to transparency, and designing ground floor to support active uses. Those are challenging problems that really, if you do it right, I think it can have a really big impact on the way people experience the streetscape and just creating that wonderful density that we're all after.
yeah. Do you see even a question in this? Do you feel like your buildings are doing both and that's the job?
Yeah, I feel like it really goes back to kind of that urban question of what does the neighborhood need? Because sometimes I think it does need, a building that meets the street and has an active ground floor and put eyes on the street, just Jane Jacobs, the whole thing, But I think you can still have delight in background buildings. Like I think about all the 1920s housing stock that, like you were saying, it's just stacked, everything's stacked, like really beautifully detailed and beautifully proportioned and sometimes oriented around courtyards, and those can be really delightful as well.
Yeah, I think backdrop and delight are not necessarily exclusive at all. And, you don't want, some of our buildings, some people think they're loud, and we hope they're not, not gratuitously loud. But I think that, that feeling of care can be in a very, very subtle, and that people are much more sophisticated in sensing that something has been loved during the design process, then they respect that. And that sounds funny, but you will actually, it's anecdotal, but I feel you get less graffiti if the building, if you really put your heart and soul in it, that people don't mess it up as much. And a lot of graffiti is really kind of anger, I think, and anger at being insulted and not being given respect.
I think too, thinking about how people experience buildings. Like architects, we get so, I mean, we like look at it from above, we turn it over, we look at it from the way a bird or a drone sees buildings so often. But that really, your architecture, your building can be lacking above the first 20 feet, but really the first 20 feet are where, we all experience buildings and cities and neighborhoods. And so I think you really also have to measure the success of your ground floor, shown in this way, which is about activating those edges and energizing the ground floor. Because if you think about it, if you guys think about your favorite urban moments, I have to believe they're like all moments like this, right? It's like when you run into your neighbor at your neighborhood cafe, or you stumbled upon that jazz performance because they had a speaker outside, or there's a pop-up at David's house. When you stumble upon these like craft popsicles, like this is the richness of cities. And so as architects, we've got this real duty to pay attention to the first 20 feet.
And often, if you say, how tall is the building where your favorite cafe is? And even architects won't remember if it's in a high-rise or if it's a one-story building. I mean, it's just because you focus on that immediate, it's like comes from the savannah. You're looking out for tigers.
The prey, yeah. Exactly. And I think, too, it's really tough, especially, you guys are doing hundreds of units at a time. It's so impressive. And so think about the complexity you're coordinating and the schedules you're thinking about. But really also, it's such a discipline to then come back down to this detail of how do we make sure that the ground floor is going to be successful, and particularly successful over economic cycles, where sometimes retail is thriving, and that makes sense for that neighborhood. But often when you're building, you don't know. And so trying to set up the framework on the ground floor so that it could work and flex. And so again, this is stuff that's not rocket science. It's like, here we leveraged our structural bay to kind of create these storefront segments, and remembering, to put your awnings and light the signs. It's really kind of minding your P's and Q's, of the ground floor. And then ceiling height matters a lot. 10-foot in new construction is really tough to make really wonderful. And like Brad was mentioning, a lot of our work is wood frame over podium, like Brad said. And so we've got this question about where to set this datum. And so we often have the parking, embedded in the middle with an active residential liner or a commercial liner. And so 10 foot is really too low. 12, I think you could make it work. You could then start to get some steps for that unit, but your retail still feels pretty squashy. 17 or 18 is really great because you can start to get some loft spaces in your commercial uses. Parking stackers is something we lean on a lot in San Francisco, so you can start to get that second level of stacker. And then at the ground floor, you have more flexibility residential-wise. You can kind of make that residential unit spill out to the street and add a loft, so it could be a flex unit. And then often when we're in neighborhoods where it's just hard to imagine, God, what would be good on the first floor here? We advocate for something even higher to give the most flexibility. Not only so that you could, have nice little disco parties in your retail space, but you could have a full second story. If you actually go to 21 feet, you can get a triple height stacker, which sometimes we are also leveraging. And then the residential side, you get to, you could have a townhouse, but that also has a stoop. And then that was kind of the vertical case, but now thinking horizontally, you often need to kind of pay attention to what is the sidewalk that we've inherited here. Is it enough that like the tenants in the ground floor can thrive and do the things we want it to do? And so in this neighborhood, we realized we needed to set back so that there's space for those things like awnings and seatings. And we call this the Q zone. I still think we need a better name for it, but the idea was to make room for quirkiness. And so that tenants and people could make their mark, because again, we think about walking along a block. I was just shopping today, y'all, and the joy is that every 10 feet, there's like something new to look at. And so we really want to make space for that quirkiness and sidewalk seating. And then residential as well, so that you have more of that buffer, from the urban realm. And then also a place, when you get that residential buffer and stoops, it's a place again for people to make their marks and put their pink flamingos, which I think has been really, I don't know, it's just really humbling, especially as a housing architect. Like ultimately our buildings are about the people that live in them. And so making these spaces for them to make it their own. And then this project, I remember we fretted, it's like over 600 linear feet. I mean, it was a pretty rough street, like folks were camping there beforehand, and it was just really hard to imagine how anybody would want to rent a space on that ground floor. And so this is where we really tested an extreme case for flexibility, where we pulled all the structure, out to the exterior, and we added a few more bays so that they could be leased in kind of these micro, affordable by design sizes, so that mom and pop jeweler could then, maybe they're successful, they grow into the second, more spaces, or they lease it all. And actually what ended up happening was the California College of the Arts leased the entire facade, and then the corridor just became the sidewalk. So it's become this really active, vibrant space. And then flex units, or live work, however you want to call them, are another tool of ours when we're just not really sure what's going to work. And I mean, we've seen this test case in our neighborhood where our San Francisco office is. There's a lot of the units like this that, at one time were like tech offices, and then there was like the .com crash, and then they became residential units, and then tech came back. And, it's just because these spaces were flexible, they've been able to house different, types of uses over time.
Yeah, if you design a flex space, it's really interesting. People actually will use it that way. And some of the developers we worked with, we did some, and we were walking along, and it was so hard to talk them into it. And basically, they got to have it. This was when they had a housing, a maximum number of housing units. So they got extra flex units, and they could have extra units that way. And they thought, well, they're not very good, but we probably won't rent them. Anyway, so how's it going? And they said, well, they're all rented.
Yeah.
And one of the developers turned to the other and said, I guess we underpriced them. Yeah, so it can be a really good thing. One of the things is you get a sense you're not living in a big building. You get a door on the street, and people really like that. And we often, I don't know if you saw in the photograph, we put Dutch doors in, which are a really fantastic way to mitigate the public from the private. Okay, be welcoming. So this is something. These are not rocket science, but I don't know if anybody has taught studios or been to crits at studios, and often it amazes me so often. Someone have this beautiful design, and it's all, it's incredibly interesting form, and you go to the student, and where is the front door? And they'll have this panicked look, and and it's like, so the simple things are important. So anyway, so be welcoming, and that's all, and that just means where your front door is. So these are kids, just to talk about why you do affordable housing. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but this is formerly homeless family housing. These kids are all living in cars, and kids do, it's one of the things that I think is really important with this sort of special needs housing is these kids have a much easier time doing their homework, and they do much better in school because it's really hard to do your homework in the back seat of a car, that doesn't have any heat, and people are pretty, it's a stressful situation. But anyway, so this is by the front door, and this again, you see they were sitting on that wall over there. This community input, this is an interesting thing. That big shield was a community input request to have something that wasn't rectilinear. And so we kind of went, don't throw us in that briar patch. And then we got to tell the contractor, oh, you can't cut that out. The community wanted it. So it was, we're playing both sides of it. But then also at the front door, in this case, there's a really nice courtyard, and you're looking through that courtyard, so you have a sense of welcoming and daylight. It isn't like a dark den. This is another door entry, and we'll do a little procession here, but one of the things that we've thought about a lot, and there's a lot of nuance to these things, but this is the idea of a feng shui compliant entry, which just means that instead of going right in the building, you go into a decompression zone. And in this case, it's this wonderful garden designed by David Fletcher, Fletcher Studio. So you go in, and there's a ramp up, and there's beautiful landscaping. We have the luxury bike parking there. This is not an affordable project, by the way. And then one of the things that we've done over the years is we work a lot with various artisans. And there's a guy named Paco Prieto. And this was back in '92. Oh my God. Which was, I think, just a couple years ago. Anyway, you know how, and I think people still do this, where you draw that line that points to the hinges. Yeah, and he goes, what is that line? And I go, oh, that's, just, you don't have to worry about that. It's just we know that's the hinge side. The architects just do that. Why we do it isn't, probably totally justified, but it's there. And he goes, well, could I put mullions on that angle? And I went, oh, it's not gonna be a lot harder. And he goes, oh, no, if you do a door like this and you don't put those braces in, it's much harder because you have 4 moment joints. From a fabricator's viewpoint, it's much more difficult to build the square than it is to do this K. And so he built it, and then we started, I think he's done like 50 doors for us over the years. So anyway, and this is an example of, I think, bringing some care into it, because these doors cost about the same as other entry doors, and we talked our clients into doing it. And, they often, if you have an idea and you ask somebody, they'll do it, which is nice. Anyway, so this is, and then you get inside and you look back through this courtyard and out. So it's part of that entry sequence. Here's another one. You can see the K door again, admission bay. This is, I'm not going to do that. This wonderful rain screen system, custom rain screen system. But you go through into this open lobby, which I realize you can't do in New York. You'd be amazed how hard this is to do in California, because everybody's worried they're going to get too cold in California. But it's real to them. But actually, what was funny here is that we had some user input from management. They didn't want the open lobby because it was going to be too cold, right? And then we went. We used, like, I think it was a Revit or the Lumion design option, and we showed them the enclosed with glass, and then we showed it open, and it looked a lot better open. And we said, Amy, you save $120,000 if you don't put that glass wall in. And then actually at the opening, she said, and then I made the architects not enclose the lobby. I mean, yeah, right. It was your idea. Anyway, so this is, and this was interesting too, because we have 2 front doors, and then you walk through the courtyard, and you see the other front door in the distance there. Oh, I'm doing 2 here.
Yeah,
Enlightened circulation. So this doesn't mean, this. I don't know how many people go to Vegas. I have relatives who, they sent out a Christmas card, which was, and we got to Vegas 28 days this year. But you know how when you go to Vegas, there's no windows in the corridors of the hotels? And that's because it's really deeply unpleasant. They want you downstairs gambling. So enlightened circulation really just means you have a window in the corridor, but it could mean open air. And it's a tough lift. And probably, though there is a project in Brooklyn, I was amazed by some really good architects who did this open circulation. And I'm just thinking, doesn't it snow here?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I think there is probably a legitimate argument to not having open corridors in New York City. I would do it. I think it's so much nicer.
But there are lots of buildings with a double-leaded corridor with no window at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely do that.
So it just means some window and open air if you can, and also stairs. Okay, so this is actually, we're going to be in the American Pavilion of the Biennale, and the theme is porches. And so we had done this building in Charleston. And the thing about Charleston is they have a tradition of the single house, and which is a multi-story porch on one side of the building, where all the circulation is. And we had this is an interesting story in regulation in that we proposed this. We had a double-loaded building, and I had about 50 units. They said, you could do it this way, but you'd have to do all these things that we couldn't do in California because they wouldn't meet the various codes we have to satisfy to do affordable housing. And they went, well, I've been the planning director. I'm not going to do this so next.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it.
I've been the planning director for 27 years, and Mayor Riley's been mayor for 28. And if we like it, you can do it. Yeah, that was pretty nice.
Also, our local architect partner, he was nervous because he's like, everybody that doesn't live here comes to Charleston and wants to riff on this single house.
He said Yankee architect.
Yeah, yeah. He's always kept us honest.
You Yankee architects all come
Yeah.
out, we want to
He
do a
likes
single
it.
house. And, okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is interesting, and so this, our developer, quite wonderful, they bought rocking chairs for all the senior project, and they bought the rocking chairs. And this is kind of your architect's picture. I think we did a rendering, it looked like this, right? And the people sitting in the nice rocking chairs, they all match. But this is what it's turned into. And I think we visited, and Amanda burst into tears.
I did.
Actually, of joy, because people were just having such a great time using these porches.
What
And again,
what is that width, David? What's the depth of the porch?
it's about 12 feet.
Yeah.
Maybe
I think it's
15.
15.
15?
I think it's 15.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and also, it really helps when the fire marshal is related to the mayor.
Well, I don't think the fire marshal would appreciate all the furniture.
Because this is the exit corridor, with these French doors opening out into it. So, but it all meets code.
I mean, another thing, when we went out to photograph, a woman, I don't think we've got that photo in the show, but a woman had that door propped open, to that porch. And again, we all think about how people are going to use our buildings, but that's why I cried that day, is because it's just like, holy shit, it's their house, And so she, was talking to her neighbors, and then, all this furniture is everywhere that I definitely wouldn't have picked. But that's okay.
I think this guy woke up
Yeah.
while we were there. He was napping.
Yeah. But it's also, I mean, I love this too because it's also very place-based. I think it gets to this question, you'll talk about this later, but just
Yeah, we can talk.
if we design in
There
places.
aren't really 9 ways. They're all kind of muddled together.
Yeah, but how, if we're practicing in different cities, how can we authentically be kind of place reflective? And, a building in Charleston shouldn't look like the one in San Francisco.
Well, don't you think the international style works everywhere?
We can debate that later.
And then this is an interesting one and kind of really special because this is affordable housing that's dug into a hillside. So this is facing the street. And then you go in and you go down this corridor and you see daylight because it's underground in back. And there's all kinds of, this was the community center for this kind of new neighborhood. And there's actually got a great picture of there's a recording studio in here. And it's still very operational, looks wonderful, and they produce records for the community. Anyway, and then from above, you can see a lovely architect, Andy Cochran, and she did this, the contractor, that was an example of talking a contractor into something that he really wanted to do and knew it was going to be really hard, but was really proud of it, so that he didn't go like, it's $1 billion. He went, we'll figure it out. We'll work together. Okay.
Okay, so common spaces, I think is, I mean, we've heard, I guess the street is your first common space, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first one. And then I guess, how are you all do you have a role in even designing some of the programs? Sounds like you're also trying to create the most flexibility so anything can happen. How are you thinking about these kinds of spaces?
It's interesting. I feel like between our market rate projects and the affordable projects, they behave a little bit differently. Whereas the market rate projects, amenities tend to be about, and common spaces tend to be about kind of being the best or being the most distinguished and really being about a leasing tour. Where I feel like when we're designing our affordable projects, it really is how will this work for the residents? And how do we group these things so they'll be functional, and building maintenance or building management can kind of manage them well, and the residents feel again like it's theirs to use. And so I think they're both important in both kind of building types, but I feel like in our affordable buildings, they become this real lifeblood that's not necessarily on the street. I mean, sometimes they are, but often they're paired with one of the courtyards in the building.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things is having them, and I guess we're going to talk about this a little bit, but having them so that people come together. Like they might really want a washer dryer in their unit. In affordable housing, that'll add several $1,000s to the unit, and then maybe big insurance claims later on when the washer overflows. Whereas if you do a really nice laundry room with some really nice soft seating near it, and with access to a courtyard, then people will go there and there's Wi-Fi in the lobby, and maybe a lot of people who are in lower incomes aren't going to have Wi-Fi at home, right? Because that's another charge. So, and then people hang out and they talk to each other. So I think you get actually a great sense of community. That's your goal. And I hate to say it, but one of your goals too is to have uncontrolled space, because there is a tendency among the nonprofit developers they're really overwhelmed, and they really want to one of the
Have
best
a lock and key.
Yeah.
yeah, one of the best ways to make sure that you don't have to do maintenance is to not let people use it.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of times in affordable housing that the laundry room is treated more like a back of house space, and it's kind of in the bike room, and they're tucked down in the basement. But
Well, the bike room doesn't have to be in the basement
it doesn't have to be in the basement. It can be next to the front door, and so I think that these spaces that are, that are sometimes treated as back of house spaces are really opportunities to activate the common areas of the building.
The thing that is too bad is that I don't think we've ever gotten a dog wash. All our market rate projects have dog laundry
A
mutts.
dog spa.
Yeah, dog spa, and which is a big leasing thing in San Francisco,
Yeah.
where we have more dogs than kids, I think. But I think that's probably true everywhere. People really like to take their dog to the beach and not take them in their
Not
their
take the
house,
beach home.
their home.
Yeah.
And also seen on the West Coast, bike rooms that have bike washing zones.
Yeah.
I mean.
And repair.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I was going to add too, we recently did this affordable housing design guidelines for the DC Housing Authority. They'd really wanted to do these big units for families because everybody wants to house families. And they're like, why aren't these spaces leasing? And so we did some community engagement sessions just to ask how the building was working. And then around common amenity design, I mean, one of the big pieces of feedback was like, we need places for different ages to kind of be able to be free to do their thing, like little kids to be loud, teens to play video games, and grandma and grandpa to play a board game but be able to watch the kids. And that's something that we've tried to bring kind of back into our portfolio, kind of at that detailed level of how do you not build more amenity space because we often don't have room, but how can different ages kind of be together, And then I think Datner had this really cool precedent we found, if anybody's here from there, that had a resource library. You could check out those big fancy blenders that take up lots of room on your KitchenAids?
Vitamix.
You could rent a Vitamix, you could rent a KitchenAid, so if anybody from Datner, I want to hear how that is working. I want to talk about that. How's it working? I want to talk to you about that. I want to do that. It looks brilliant to me. So
there's a lot of spaces that are available. We did a sound isolated studio, so I don't know. I've met people whose kids got drum sets, and all I can say is that if you try to avoid doing that, if you can, or if you do, live in one of our projects where you could put the drum set in this room where they could just drum their hearts out and nobody could hear it.
yeah, we got
Except
excited
that
about that.
they were having a good time.
Okay, yeah, so, I mean, we've actually talked about a little bit of this stuff, but it's a common sense. How do we not have the mail in some dark space, but how can the mail maybe be next to property management or next to the laundry or next to the courtyard so that it's actually just makes living in the building easy, and then hopefully fosters social resilience and a social kind of community. So here, this is the community room, that spills out. We've got kind of a multi-age play area here. Laundry, there's a kind of messy kids art space here, and then raised vegetables. So, you can tend your vegetable while your kid, gets off some energy, or you can look at the vegetables while you're doing your laundry, and it just makes, living in the building easier. And here we did this kind of in section. This is that open lobby project David was talking about, but the big community room is here that spills out into this patio with the grill area, but then these are these kind of smaller scale amenities like laundry, lounge, gym, etc. And then for our book, we did this little sketch that tries to imagine. Hopefully, this is what it fosters, that you get to kind of run into your neighbors more. Also, just this sense of safety too, because there's just visibility, and kids tend to really do loops on their scooter here. And then this is up top. David calls this the Smurf turf. When we went back and looked at this recently, they'd put a tiny little soccer goal here. So again, you're doing your laundry and your kids are out there kicking the soccer ball while you're folding clothes.
That qualifies as a top line.
Oh, right, per tax credit requirements. Yeah, exactly. And then art is really important in our projects as well.
Art. And so well, for a long time, we were trying to figure this out because these buildings are pretty good sized. And, you know, I think at one point we went out and tried to buy original art and you put it in the building and it was really sad because there's this huge area and there's a couple little framed, you know, because art's pretty expensive. But so it's really an important thing to bring that other dimension of humanity and the making, what people are. Because, I mean, modern buildings are so isolating, I think, and you know, there's not curves. I mean, I think our community group that wanted the curve, that's a very real desire because, you know, there's so little that shows the work of the hand. But so we partnered, and one of the ways we solved it was there's a disabled adult art studios that have sprung up, and they're in the Bay Area, and I think they happen across their country. And they license these patterns, and then the artist gets a royalty payment. And in this case, this is a relatively small drawing. It got blown up. We made it into wallpaper on this room. It's really quite wonderful. And in this case, we did the same thing with drawings, blew them up, and then they're different on each level so that it serves as wayfinding. And when you get off, you see this work. And then we worked with the San Jose State Sculpture Department, and there was a kid there making these really wonderful sculptures with steel rods, and so that worked its way in. And this goes right into it. So what does get personal mean? Besides having the best, we really, yeah. If you want a pin, just send Amanda an email. But anyway, so what does it mean to get personal? And that can mean, I think, the community process is really important, and it's important in a number of ways. You get really great ideas from people who are on the ground, who actually live there. I mean, ideally, we would go and camp out on the site for a week and over several seasons, and we'd really understand it. But we have never done that, and you know, I think it would be really hard to do it. But so listening to people is really great. In this case, this is another where people wanted a curve really a lot, and you know, in the modern housing, building really wants to be a shoebox, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to, you know, a lot of the construction magic that's going to save money, we hope. It doesn't actually get better. Those things make things boxier. They're really, when they do what they want to do, you know, a volumetric modular building is, you know, a big volume that's rectangular. So anyway, in this case, you know, the circulation, vertical circulation, and the laundry rooms are actually in that pod in the middle. And then here, in terms of getting personal, is the urban agriculture on the roof, and these were plots that individuals had, and actually those windows are the windows of the laundry room. And so people go up there and they do their laundry and take care of their vegetables or flowers. You know, stoops are super great in terms of being personal. People, it gives you that, you know, Jane Jacobs kind of thing where you're, it gives you that zone where you're both private but public and not in danger, so you can interact with people. And I'm going to say that these things, again, in the not rocket science, we started, I think, at some point we were painting the doors on different floors, all one color. And we thought, well, you know, but unless you go to other floors, you don't know there's other colors. So what if we just pick 5 really nice colors and then just put them through, and then people get their special door. I mean, there's all, and I think London is, you have all these incredibly boring background buildings, and because there's no sunlight there, they paint the doors these amazing, vibrant blues and greens and British racing green, stuff like that. And this is a project where this is formerly homeless, and we did all the doors in those colors. This woman was actually, you know, she was a street person, and then this is a little aside, and it has nothing to do, we started doing these doorbell, sometimes they have lights, but we started making them so you could put stuff on them, and and personalize your entry. And I'll say that the contractors kept charging so much money. They'd look at it and go like, oh, that's going to be like $2,000 each. So we actually build these in-house now for far less, and then go, oh yeah, these are $300 and they're really nice. And then they go, oh, okay, we can afford that. But anyway, she had just graduated Phi Beta Kappa from San Francisco State. And she's, housing really, housing, and we'll talk about what affordable means, but for special needs affordable, this is formerly homeless families, it really changes lives in incredible ways. So to talk about community, this is the mission in San Francisco where I live. There's a lot of murals going on. And then we did a building right near the BART station, taking some of those colors. This is Mexicali Rose, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, color. But then, and then that entry goes through bringing those colors in. It has this wonderful. This was interesting in terms of parking. We had two things. We had a building. Our client decided that she really liked having parking for the manager and staff. And they said, well, we have to take out the Early Childhood Development Center. That's the size of the 5 parking spaces you want. And then here also we put a really nice play area on the roof. So this is all very much in the nature of the mission. There's a Zocalo here. We have gates that open up so that can be made more public. This is one of the parties they were having there. And you see these murals appearing on that wall. Were they on this? Oh, yeah, they're there. So these happened after the fact. This is a celebration there. And then we did this, we called it the Paseo del Artista. And again, you can, for about the size of a parking space and the cost, you can do an art studio. And so we did these art studios along this alley. And then this fantastic nonprofit called Youth Art Exchange moved in. And we did it, and actually I'll say one of the things that isn't part of 9 Ways, but we did this design for the interior, and they put a dark room in. And I was like, dark room, don't all these kids have, smartphones? But it's really fantastic because these kids get really excited about working with film. And it's a really wonderful, wonderful organization. You can see the painting on skateboards. And they did those murals in the building. And then just to finish off in terms of personal, this is my mother and child. But, really, 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 we've done a lot of housing. I've had people, like get married in hotels we've done, move to San Francisco, live in the studio apartment, and then buy a loft and kind of go through the life cycle. But the life-changing nature of affordable housing for people is just really absolutely incredible. It can be life-saving. It isn't the only thing to do. I mean, there's a whole range of approaches, and I think one of the things we tend to do is we think something's a good idea, and then we do it for a while, and then all our problems aren't solved, and then we politically reject that, and we try something new, when really we need to keep working on all the obvious things really hard, and you shouldn't just throw things away because they haven't solved every problem, because no direction solves every problem. Okay.
Awesome. Why don't we, I think maybe we should make sure we make some time for questions. So let's open it up. Are folks burning, or do you want my question?
I do have a question.
Okay.
A lot of with the plan.
Why don't you, let's see, tell us who you are, stand up.
All right.
And, oh, okay.
That's okay.
Sorry, I got the nod to move forward.
We can repeat your
Maybe
question.
we're not
Barry
cooking.
Yinku, I work for Corgan. I do airports, but I did do housing for quite a bit of time. And the thing that I noticed in that article about the bland, a lot of the issues of bland these buildings. You see them in Seattle, you see them in San Francisco, you see them all over the country. They're governed by the construction techniques.
Sure.
Right? I mean, a lot of it is use these range screens and these stud wall construction. And I guess the challenge is how do you make them different? With color, you know, range of things that you can do. But it's not really a question. I'm sort of wondering, once the economics of putting housing together really plays a big role in it, and you're sort of pigeonholed into using these wall systems, I call them range screen systems, you're kind of already into one language. You know that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I think it's, it's architecture of a certain era. The interesting thing that our practice in the Southeast has shown is that certain areas, like full-size brick, is actually an economy material.
It's probably true
like
for
here
you,
in
too.
New York, actually.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that was, everyone, when I came to New York, everyone was tired of working with brick. Like every project is brick, and but for me, it was like, oh my God, we get to use actual bricks.
That's the way we thought in Charleston.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so I think that there's, how else I said, architects are often, maybe they look at Instagram too much or something. They could be a little more creative in ways.
No, but what I'm getting at is that the technique of making walls sort of then governs that blandness, because even though you do vary them all, they all look like the same thing, even though you change the color, and because they're
Right.
all the same flat or corrugated or some variations. They all, you can see it was built you can almost date the buildings.
Well, I think that's true, though. And buildings have gotten bigger, and when they're bigger, there's more of them, and they're harder to make wonderful.
Yes.
I still,
Thank you very much. It was a beautiful presentation.
sorry, we've got to go.
And are there other questions? I should say. I was worried we were going to not
Hi,
get
I'm
enough.
Cliff Pearson. I write about architecture. Have you gone to other parts of the world where you've seen really interesting, innovative housing ideas that you've been able to incorporate in your own work?
Well, I think, the thing about best practices from other places is there's often a reason they're in that other place, and it's very hard to transfer back. So, and Amanda invented this concept of creative tenacity. So I think we concentrate on the local, and then try to come up with ideas that aren't maybe mainstream. And it's always really challenging to, we're working in Nashville, and we're working in areas where they don't like to use rusted metal, because that means it's, they got a lot of rusted metal already out in the boonies. But, then we kind of just keep graciously suggesting it.
Well, it costs, I think to your point about making walls, not only are we limited to the type of walls, but what we can clad those walls with, right? So it's like, how creative can we be with James Hardy siding? And so, we've gotten really excited about like a regular board and batten or a textured board and batten and how you striate it. And then the reason we keep saying, well, let's use this rust wall is because it costs kind of the same and it's something else.
We've been pretty tricky. So, there's this thing where you use hardy plank and you put battens on it. Very boring, right? So at some point we realized, oh, you can use different size battens and they can stick out more and they can be random and you can striate it and all these wonderful patterns. And we called it RBS, which is random batten siding. And then with the contractors, it worked really well because we go, that's hardy. It's cheaper than dirt. And they go, oh yeah. It took them a while to figure out they had to drive more nails, so the price started going up. But that was, and it was, we said, it's ranch house technology, and that you nail it on and you paint it. It's not Swiss pearl, but it looks really good. And actually people haven't copied us too much on it. It's interesting. I would thought people had, because it's inexpensive and weathers well and doesn't fail and all that good stuff.
I'm coming back to your question too. I can think of an international trip you took that you talked a lot about where we were doing our first modular project, I think, or maybe had a couple on the boards, and you went to Sweden. That makes us look, it's like the Wild West here on modular. Like, I know you guys are doing some modular too. It's just insane. The standards vary from factory to factory, and especially affordable developers have to upfront so much cash. But I don't know if you want to say anything about that, because you were just like, they've got it down.
Well, what they have down, it's interesting. So in Sweden, they have building engineers who design the buildings. And interestingly enough, you go to Sweden, you'll see almost no carving, because the engineers will be like, why would you carve? You're getting less for more cost. We're not going to do that. But so the architects get, I want to say, they complain about it fairly bitterly, but they get relegated to the skin of the building a lot. And then so the buildings in Stockholm are very boxy with really wonderful skins on them. And that can go a long way. All I can say, you can, and they have good ground level. So I think that maybe not being too much. I don't know how many people have seen The Brutalist, but I was thinking, I've taught some classes in school. And you always had the kid who was reading the Fountainhead, and you'd go like, oh boy, because there's this idea of the genius, and everybody else is kind of an idiot. And I don't think that's good for, maybe it's good for architects because you can charge more if you're the genius, but it's not necessarily good for for the city or the urban realm. I was on a panel once, and they said, well, what's the most important thing about cities? I said, well, it's the plan. It's really not the buildings. If you have a good plan, you can have bad buildings. If you have a bad plan, you can have great buildings, and it's not going to be a great city. So that's like a great thing to say to a room full of architects, but.
So we saw so many different projects, and I know you guys have, I think, made 15,000 homes.
It's a little more now.
More? How many? 16,000?
More. We don't
18,
count.
20?
I think it's 15 plus.
Quite a lot.
Yeah.
And I think about 50-50 affordable and market rate. And I don't know if we know when we are looking at the pictures sort of what's what. I'm wondering, what did you learn from each typology that helped to inform the other and kind of advance the body of work?
Well, I think one of the big distinguishers is the play between the amenities, like I was mentioning. But I think I'm having trouble answering that question because I think the reality is that you mentioned this, that we approach them in the same way. And that just like from client to client, our nonprofit clients operate in a different way than our market rate clients. So I would say it's not necessarily about approaching kind of affordable versus market rate. It's really kind of a client-driven, how are you going to manage this project? Like, what are your vision? What is the community vision? And having that manifest in each project.
Yeah, the affordable developers, because they're more values-based, they're much more pushing energy efficiency and green building. And then the market rate developers are often, I hate to say easier to manipulate, but they really want to be the best. So like one of those buildings, it took the hardest time. We said, we should do LEED certification. I go, why would we do that? That's stupid. We go, well, if you do LEED Gold, you get priority processing through the city. And they go, okay, we'll do LEED Gold. And then like 2 weeks later, they come back. We've decided we got to do platinum because they were pounding their chest. And what was interesting, then we had all these fires and we had all this air pollution, and they went, oh, we are marking this building as having HEPA filters inside, and it's become a really great marketing tool for people. So it's interesting. I would say that there's a little difference, whereas our affordable clients in California now, they've decided that balconies are bad. And so we can't put any balconies on buildings. They just say, don't even think about it. And we're like, equity, like private space where you don't get. What's wrong with the balcony? They cost money. And what happened is there was in Berkeley, there were some people who were partying, and they were drinking, and they were jumping up and down the balcony, and it fell off, and a few of them died. and there was a construction defect in the balcony. So everybody, oh, you know, it's like concrete building, the balconies don't fall off, and they aren't that expensive. People really love them. Whereas the market rate people, that, you know, you'd get the big honchos, and they go, oh, why do we have balconies that cost money? And I just learned to say, ask your marketing people about balconies. And the marketing people would come back, well, we get, you know, money for those balconies. We'd like to have as many balconies as you could possibly fit on the building. So it's not a, you know, so sometimes the profit motive isn't necessarily bad, what I'd say. And I've tried that on the nonprofits, like, hey, you know, equity would mean that we would give people lower income a really great private outdoor space, and they just kind of go, shut up. I haven't had any success with that line.
That's because also there's less, I mean, was it previously the case that like the affordable developers were required in San Francisco to do, like you would get a certain amount of open space benefit for the, like there's a zoning requirement around open space, and has that gone away? Is that part of it also?
I think that we have, they're sorting through, and I think open space would be a objective requirement.
Right, because
So then you'd have to do it. So they've divided the world into objective, because a lot of planning requirements were subjective. You know, like we want the building to have a top, or saying we want a cornice. Well, that's not an objective requirement. That's like you like cornices.
I think to the note on regulation, I think another
Get
thing,
out of that.
yeah, I think our market rate clients actually enjoy a lot more freedom than our affordable clients often, because there are, you know, the regulations that come with the tax credits, and then it gets funneled through city, maybe the city throws their extra requirements on. And so often we can be more creative in our market rate projects that actually can save money but still provide quality, that sometimes we're just like, oh, I wish we could do this also in the affordable, but, you know, particular regulation prevents us from doing so.
It's slower. And I have good news from California, which is that we're getting projects to be under budget now, because the economy has slowed to the point where there's money left over, and they're going like, oh, we didn't spend $1 million. And unlike market rate, the market rate people would just go, oh, $1 million, save $1 million, great, put it in their pocket. But affordable people, you know, they're not going to send it back, so they tend to, you know, install the solar collectors, do something nice with it. So that really heartened me when I started seeing that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the, I mean, I love working with market rate developers and affordable developers, but you know, with the affordable developers, it's always this question of, we've got a certain amount of money, and how do we make like the best building possible with it? And they're going to hold that building, they're going to own it and operate it for the lifetime. And so there's just a different kind of mentality around decision making, and you know, where it's really about leveraging design to get the most bang for your buck. That's not always the case with market rate, where, you know, maybe they're only planning to hold the building for 10 years or something like that. And so it's really about, there's like more financial consideration, but, you know, the way that they think about spending is a little different.
So they're great nonprofit
here we have a
developers and
question.
great market
Yes.
From the balcony.
In the balcony.
Hi, my name is Tyler. I teach a class at NJIT. It's called Social Issues in Housing. You know, it's really about like the human-centered component of this. You talked a little bit about, you know, taking it personal. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about engaging residents or prospective residents in the design process, and whether or not you've gone back after the fact and seen whether or not they have agency over those spaces and really take joy in it.
That's a great question. Yes. So we're trying to do this as a standard. We don't always get this chance, but a lot of our clients are repeat clients, or sometimes our new clients have an existing portfolio. So we get to do post-occupancy evaluation and ask those questions, like, do you know how to live in your unit? Are the things working like we thought? But also, we get really honest feedback about, we thought that open stair to the outside was a good idea. Do they also agree? We also get to ask the maintenance folks, like, what's your biggest headache day to day? Same thing with property management. And then that's so great, because then it becomes kind of the beginning of the next project in addition to the community engagement. And so when clients let us go ask those questions, you learn so much.
And I think this is actually another thing about affordable developers. There's there's the property management teams that are like working in the buildings and operating them every day. And then there's the development staff that are in the office. And sometimes, I mean, this is, it varies from, affordable housing developer to affordable housing developer, but sometimes they don't talk a whole lot. And so POE, also, one of the ways that DBA does POE, which I think is great, is they try to do it like at the beginning of a new project so that you're bringing the project team that you're about to work on this new building with to one of the buildings that the owner previously built and it has in operation. And then you're kind of, you're bridging that gap between the property management and the development team that you're about to work with, and all these lessons then feed into the new project.
So, and we're trying to start a new acronym, which is SO. So POE, not a good acronym. Not as bad as the AHD, but yeah. But which sounds like you take a pill for. But so the thing about post-occupancy is, you'll get, oh, the windows don't open enough, and why don't they open enough? Well, but it's too noisy, and we really, because it's too hot. And we're saying, well, we really need to put cooling in these units. If you'll keep the windows closed in the middle of the city, because if you're living in the Tenderloin, you open your window, you're not going to be happy. And so you do learn things, but so we're doing this thing called SO, which is Site Evaluation Walk, and that means you get maintenance people, you get the development people, you get some tenants, and you walk maybe 5 existing projects of these developers, and they go like, well, and a lot of it is pretty prosaic. It's like, this garbage chute didn't work out, and or they can be bigger issues. But the great news is that you do it in the beginning when everybody's is all frisky and you've got some feed. When you do it's hard to do post-occupancy evaluation because it's at the end where you've lost money and everybody's exhausted. So,
David, one of our developers at AHGLI called it post-occupancy evaluation meeting so that it would be poem.
Nice.
good.
I like
That
it.
kind of perked it up a little
Yeah.
bit.
we were just trying to take it to the front end, and which, in our experience, everybody's been much happier with that because then you immediately inform the new project you're designing for them. So it isn't, you're not doing a paper on it. You're then designing a building, taking that feedback, and because one of the things that happens is like on entries on some of these very low income, formerly homeless, you'll talk to the development staff and they're, oh yeah, we don't need that second door in the office. And then if you build it, the person in that office goes, where's the second door? Because sometimes my clients get violent and I want to be able to run away. And this is, not a pleasant thing. So we end up putting the second door in after it's built, which then costs $10,000 or $20,000 to do. So we tend to yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we know you don't need a second door. Oh, gee, we put one in anyway, because we think that you might want it, and the people who work here might want it. There's a difference between the people who work there and the development staff.
I like to think of POE as a kind of community engagement where, typically when we do community engagement on affordable housing buildings, we're going and we're talking to the neighborhood stakeholders, like the surrounding business owners and residents, and their perspective is really valuable, but they're kind of interested in what's happening on the building on the outside and how big is it and what it's going to look like and what's going on the ground floor. But if POE really should happen at the beginning of the process as part of engagement with the people that are actually going to use the building. So you go back and you talk to property management staff and the maintenance staff and the residents from a building that your client just built. And then you're getting this much more kind of internal perspective on how the building should be built. Whereas I think traditional community engagement is actually much more externally focused. So it helps with thinking about common areas and just stuff that you don't really get to when you're doing traditional community engagement.
Is there one last question out there? I think, I guess my last real question for you guys is, it's been many years now, so many buildings, so many people, great staff like Brad and others who've come and spent good time. How do you guys sustain this incredible sort of firm culture? You're obviously incredibly curious. you're always invested in design, you're also invested in making. Like, how do you kind of, what's the magic of bringing kind of the firm culture together?
You giving that to me? Okay.
Well, do we
Oh,
want to
yeah,
show
we
we have
could.
some slides.
Yeah.
Really quick.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
So there's the firm. We're about
Brad's
seven.
in there.
Yeah,
This is an old photo.
it's really funny because we must be doing something right because we've got 4 ex-DBAers we're now partnering with on various. So
Good.
that's a good. I think that's good. Anyway, this is when we're a little smaller, about 75 now. Architecture, housing, affordable housing, market rate housing, modular, hospital. We do some fancy hotels. That's fun. And then we're doing. This is the Berkeley BART station, there was some community input. We got this approved. Interiors, which are really, that's a real wonderful thing to have folded in. Yeah, we actually had a West Coast director of design at Related say, "You are the only architect who we let do the interior of our buildings." Anyway, then this workshop has been wonderful. We're doing really fancy stuff and also simpler stuff. And then we lump everything.
Yeah, well, on the workshop though, and kind of culture, so they really impact our design process a lot. I mean, they do things like before the winter holidays, like, they hosted like everybody can make their own cutting board, which was fun. The guy that was running the shop for a while would like host barbecues like at the shop. So they're very wonderful kind of cultural spice, but then they also will prototype things for the building and they'll connect us to that making. And then, yeah, like you were about to say, that everything that doesn't fit neatly in that box, we put in this kind of DBA lab category.
Having the internal shop, none of these things are easy. And to get back to the tenacity, you just gotta, those little tippy birds that, are the things you punch and they come back up. I think that's what an architect, you gotta like be completely destroyed, go to bed, wake up in the morning and,
Do it again.
Like Energizer
Yeah.
rabbit. That's what it takes.
Or, I mean, you guys can probably relate, like anytime you go to a project opening, you've probably gleaned by now I'm a crier, but every time, somebody says, I used to be here and now I'm here and my life is better for it, you're like, I'm good for another 6 months, And that's really what binds the office together. I mean, we're just a bunch of do-gooders, probably like a lot of housers out there.
So, and I think those projects, the lab, and this is one of Brad's projects, which was to take and make this phase 0 space, which is really wonderful. And this, affordable housing is really fun because we've been designing this project for 8 years.
Yeah, the funny thing about this project, so we did this little plaza when I was with DBA. We did it pro bono for a affordable housing developer, and they were saying, oh yeah, our financing is going to come through in 3 years, but we want to do something with this space in the meantime. And so they got a grant, and then we designed this plaza, and they brought in all these local businesses. But that was back in like 2015, maybe.
I know.
So
we're still on phase. It was phase minus.
So it was supposed to be 3 years, and now the project still hasn't. I think
It is in design.
they just got
Yeah.
funding, right?
Yeah,
so
it is in
it's
design.
actually going to happen.
But the really cool thing is you hang in there,
You gotta
and
hang in.
eventually, almost all of them get built eventually.
Yeah. And then this other thing on firm culture, I mean, like David said, we're growing, we practice in more disparate places now. There's this question about how you keep the zest and how we continue to evolve design-wise. And so we're trying a bunch of stuff within the office. One of the things we started doing that we copied from Miller Hall is this idea, they call it the year-end show, but we're calling it the roundup because we're a little more country. But like we have our projects come and kind of do a presentation so we can see the portfolio together, and we have guest jurors come in, and we have a discussion about the project. So we just did our second year, and we iterated on it where we had a summer camp where everybody brought the projects into kind of a crit, and we had like a happy hour. So we're
bandanas.
yeah, I told you we're country, we wore bandanas. It's been tough kind of to start that new rhythm. It's a lot of work, but it's also, foster these discussions that people are just too busy to have, and then being able to see people's projects, because we're at the size now that not everybody is aware of every project. And so that feels like messy, but it's something we think is really important. We're trying to figure out a way to where it strikes the right balance of work for everybody, but also foster some good dialogue and self-criticism in a good way, constructive.
We started a trend where there's a thing called the Monterey Design Conference, which is the best AIA conference ever.
You guys should go.
We started taking the entire office. And at some point, I would think, this is crazy. This is way too expensive. We shouldn't do this. But then I realized that, it's so hard, and it's really worked out in the age of remote work and different, different people in different places to get to one spot and just think about architecture and sit on the beach with a bonfire. And it was money well spent, or like, it was the best bonding thing, because the world has changed so much. We don't go into the office 5 days a week in one office. And we have people all over the country, and they can be really tight if you're conscious about it. People sitting in the same office can be totally isolated.
Well,
it's
thank you
intention.
guys so much for bringing the D-Day energy.
Thank you.